588 grams. That's about the same weight as this bottle of water. That's what the specialised S-Works Aethos frame weighs. Quite possibly the lightest disc brake carbon frame we've ever seen produced from any brand. And as a build at 5.9 kilograms, there has never been a production disc brake bike made this light. The new Aethos is a brand new platform from Specialized, but the really surprising thing is we won't be seeing this in the UCI World Tour. This is a bike built for the love of riding, for people who love riding, for that cycling consumer that loves to push limits and have an ultralight bike. Well below the 6.8 UCI maximum and not designed around aerodynamics, this is a really unique offering from the brand. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what makes this so special. So firstly, seeing a new bike from Specialized at the top of the road range is pretty exciting. Last time we saw that was with the S-Works Venge, released nearly a decade ago, to much fanfare. It was Specialized's first really aerodynamically focused road bike. And in most cases, when Specialized releases a bike at the top of its range, it's released to try and win World Tour races. The Venge was to help Mark Cavendish win sprints, the Tarmac's to help their range of climbers win hilltop finishes. But the Aethos hasn't been released in that way and won't be intended for the World Tour at all. Instead, this is a bike built for enthusiastic amateurs and for normal riders like myself. And obviously, riders like me, we love lightweight and we don't feel constrained by the 6.8 kilogram UCI weight limit. But how has Specialized cut so much weight? So first things first, 5.9 kilograms as an overall bike build is incredible. This bike specifically is not coming in at that weight point. That's the Founders Edition that sits slightly more expensive price point at £13,000. This instead is the S-Works Shimano Dura-Race Di2 version, which comes in at about 6 kilograms. And that we verified that on our scales too. Now, how they've done that is mainly by cutting weight in the frame. A really important thing to notice here is these are all normal components. This is a Dura-Race crankset, normal chain, a pretty normal seat post, and even an alloy stem. A lot of the time when we have these really light overall road bike builds, they're using THM cranks, Schmaltz carbon saddles, things that really cut the weight down. And we could do that with this bike and really bring the weight down extremely low. So what they've done is cut the weight from the frame. Now you might think that's just a normal evolution of using higher modulus, better carbon fibre, but in the case of the Aethos, that hasn't been the case at all. Instead, they've really gone back to the design of the bike and the shape of the bike. And so this has been done through a process called finite element analysis, which is often called FEA. And that essentially is where you use a supercomputer to simulate all the shapes and all the materials that you want to experiment with the bicycle frame design. Now in the case of this bike, they've gone through over 100,000 simulations to find the exact shape and the exact materials they want to build the Aethos. Now while FEA may sound like a really exotic, exciting new innovation, it's worth noting that a high-end frame design, this has been around for many years. Specialized have used it a lot in their frame design historically, and the likes of BMC pride themselves in the FEA with the development of the T-Machine. But what's different about the Aethos is that it was just much more processing and a much longer process of FEA. Years spent simulating over 100,000 different frame designs. Now why that's significant is that creating all that data and then whittling down that data has been a really painstaking process for the Specialized engineers. But what it's meant is that they've managed to find this absolute golden shape, which they can then use to cut away lots and lots of weight from a conventional frame. And what that means is that Specialized argue this bike has no lazy fibres. That means that each strand is effectively playing its part and dealing with the load and the forces that a rider delivers to the frame and delivering efficient transfer of power. That development means that this bike, immediately out of the mould, the first prototype weighed only 540 grams and was able to beat most of Specialized testing protocols. It only required 40 or 50 grams extra until it could be mass manufactured and sold on the shop floor. Now that's pretty significant. We've never really seen a bike below 600 grams, especially one that is disc brake equipped. An important difference with the Aethos compared to the likes of the Venge or the Tarmac though is that aerodynamics hasn't been the central focus in its design. Now that's quite funny for a brand whose logo has historically been aero is everything, and a brand that owns its own wind tunnel in Morgan Hill. However, that said, the marginal gains of aerodynamics perhaps are more of a consideration for pro cyclists than for the average enthusiast like myself, where a kilo of extra weight gain is going to be a really big advantage on a long alpine climb or on the steep hills of Surrey or Kent. Now another effect of this focus on shape over aerodynamics is that the bike actually looks much more classic. It kind of resembles steel bikes we're used to with smaller tubes and more conventional round shaping. That's a little odd in a way because the FAA analysis meant that each cross-section has been quite carefully redesigned and they now have a more conical shape. But at the same time, that's a very subtle thing you have to look really closely to see. But from the outside, the bike just looks quite conventional. And for a lot of people, that's going to be a big appeal. It almost resembles something like a bespoke Parley or a bespoke Fesca. And of course, as a result of that, the logos and the branding are much more subtle as well. So while this new platform and this new design process is really exciting, the really key thing is what it feels like to ride. And so what does it feel like to ride a bike that's the lightest in its class? When climbing, this bike really feels weightless. That extra kilogram or 1.2 kilograms of weight on another endurance disc bike is really palpable. You just get the sense that you just get an extra couple of watts where you're just not having to drag that weight. At the same time though, that hasn't come at the cost of handling or rigidity. That's because this isn't just built around being super light. They haven't detracted any of that stiffness or rigidity from the build to achieve that low weight. In the past, when you had these super light bikes, they'd often be really flexy and wouldn't really deliver power. Or alternatively, they could be too stiff. But this hits a really nice sweet spot where it feels just like riding the Tarmac SL6 and not dissimilar to the Tarmac SL7. That's probably partly down to the 12R Fax carbon that Specialized use, but mainly down to the shape of this bike that has obviously gone through this incredibly in-depth design process. And that really means that it flexes in the right places to introduce that comfort and that stability when descending. It really handles a lot like the Tarmac SL6 that I spent a lot of time with. And the geometry and the fit is identical to the Tarmac SL7. So altogether, that's really come together in an interesting package. It does feel like a WorldTour racer, but at the same time, it isn't constrained by the limits of having to be aerodynamic or having to be 6.8 kilograms.
The Aethos really mirrors the Tarmac SL6 in handling ability. It offers the same sense of assuredness downhill and really allows you to test your limits when it comes to tight corners. That's partly down to the geometry and partly down to the stiffness of the frame and fork, which is a big influencing factor in how well a bike handles. Specialized has historically been one of the industry leaders when it comes to the rear end stiffness. No doubt the FAA process behind the Aethos really helped Specialized to match those historic BB stiffness figures. In terms of the bottom bracket, it's also worth noting that the Aethos uses a threaded BB, which for many press-fit skeptics will be a big relief. In terms of the spec, it has all the usual finishings of a top-end race bike. Shimano's Dura-Race DI2 group set is of course the world-class option for most racers. The wheelset though is also a really interesting spec. This is the new Roval CLX Alpinist wheelset. At a little over 1200 grams, this is a super light set of wheels, but also has some aerodynamic design. That's nice because the Aethos itself isn't designed around aerodynamics, so that'll do a little bit to help preserve speed and increase speed on the descents. Climbing isn't just aided by the light weight of the bike, and the stiffness that it's been designed with really allows you to feel the power transfer from the pedals to the road, and in a large part that really encourages you to push your limits when going uphill. Ultimately, when all these elements come together, the bike's just a lot of fun to ride.
So what's really interesting about this bike to me is that it's a real divergence from what we're used to from Specialized and other top-end bike brands. This hasn't been born out of the needs of pro racers, but at the same time, most consumers aren't pro racers. I'm not Peter Sagan, much as I might like to pretend to be. What I'm after is to enjoy riding a bike in areas like this, possibly be with my mates to the top of a climb, and realistically travel a lot with my bike to foreign sportives. This bike makes that a lot easier, partly because of its low weight and partly because of its simplistic, quite conventional design. We have a normal cockpit, normal saddle and seat posts, so it'll be super easy to travel with. Equally, we haven't got the usual branding we're used to. It isn't emblazoned with Specialized and S-Works logos. And in lots of ways that makes it a lot more personal. And equally it comes in a lot of colour options, almost edging it into custom colourway or even custom frame territory. But what really sticks with me about this bike is it's really bridged the gap between disc brake bikes and rim brake bikes. 5 or 6 years ago, the very top rim brake bikes might have come in at around 6 kilograms. And when disc brakes came along, a real big disadvantage was the extra weight. But now, with this top-end bike weighing only 6 kilograms, there's really no massive benefit to rim brakes above disc brakes now, especially when you consider how incredibly better disc brakes are when it comes to braking performance on descents, on wet days, and especially with carbon rims. So ultimately, I think the Aethos is going to have a legacy beyond just this bike. To me, I can see a bit of a fork in the road between bikes designed for pros within UCI limits and bikes designed for enthusiastic amateurs like me. On a more practical level, Specialized has put a lot of time, money and effort into the computation to design this specific bike with this shape. And I think we'll see elements of these tube shapes and junctions in new bikes that Specialized release in years to come. Quite exciting as well, I think we'll see more affordable Aethos bikes with lower specs coming pretty soon. And that'll be something that will probably prove much more popular for most cyclists, as this is no doubt prohibitively expensive at £10,750. So ultimately we're really excited about the Aethos and we're looking forward to spending a bit more time with it to get some real testing done. We really hope you've enjoyed our video, and if you'd like to see more videos from cyclists, please visit cyclist.co.uk or subscribe to our channel on YouTube.